Thank you. I've got an article in front of me entitled "Getting Back to the Moon Requires Speed and Simplicity," and it purports to be by Doug Cook, opinion contributor, and it goes on to say Doug Cook is a former NASA associate administrator. I just want to make sure that's the same Doug Cook who's before us today.
Yes, sir.
All right. Let me quote from it in 3 different places. Quote, "Apparently under pressure from commercial launch providers who need additional launches to fill their manifests, NASA is being directed to break the lunar lander into multiple pieces so that these can fit on less powerful commercial launchers, increasing risk and constraining the architecture," end quote. Second quote, "NASA's current approach requires 8 new developments," interjection by me, versus 3 with Apollo, 8 to 3. Resuming the quote, 8 launches versus 1 with Apollo, and approximately 17 mission-critical operations versus 7 with Apollo to achieve the Artemis goals by 2024, end quote. And then finally, quote, "If you assume each event has a 98% probability of success, the likelihood of mission success is 80% for this Apollo-like approach. In comparison, the likelihood of mission success for NASA's current approach is 51%. Not taking into account the launch vehicle maturity risk, NASA can significantly increase speed, simplicity, cost, and probability of mission success by deferring gateway, leveraging SLS, and reducing critical mission operations," end quote. Now, if I were an astronaut, I'd be concerned about these kinds of comments from a former NASA associate administrator. And they appear to suggest that profit motive, i.e. the desire of some individuals for personal gain, may be driving NASA decision-making at much greater risk to our astronauts. So I'd like to have Mr. Cook, if you would, expound on that, leaving enough time for Mr. Bowersox to reply.
I think that the pressure to get to commercial capabilities and drive that objective is causing us to do things that are higher risk. And going to this many developments from scratch, by the way, starting now, trying to get to 2024, with that many critical mission events, the probabilities are that. And if you assume 0.98, 0.98 is arbitrary, and some of the numbers would be higher, some would be lower, but it's illustrative of the complexity that's been bought into versus what could be done with a more simple approach.
Mr. Bowersox, could you please give us your view on these comments?
Yes, sir. First, nobody's driving us. I mean, we actually came to these conclusions on our own. And a big driver is to have flexibility. We want to have multiple options. We don't want to rely just on one system. We'd like to have other systems. And what we're trying to build on is some of the success we've experienced in having flexibility with our commercial cargo vehicles for station. Having multiple providers, multiple options there has been really useful. When one has a problem, we can go to the other provider. And so we want to take advantage of some of that learning and move it into this other program to help us get to the moon and on to Mars.
Well, if I could interject for a moment, do you concur with Mr. Cook's belief that the Apollo method of going to the moon was simpler and safer versus the current Artemis approach of going to the moon?
What I would say about the Apollo approach is that it was simpler. I wouldn't say it was necessarily safer. That we'll know that after we're done. But I think that our current approach has a lot of potential to be actually safer than Apollo. Even because of the flexibility and complexity, we can actually increase some of the safety aspects.
Mr. Cook, in the time that I have remaining, do you have any additional comments you would like to give on this subject?
Just that it gets back to probabilities in the end and critical events, critical launches, and the more that you have, the higher the risk. We did succeed with Space Station, which was about 40 shuttle launches to build, Had we lost a payload during that time, we didn't have backups. We didn't have the margin and budget to have backup hardware. So if we had lost one of those payloads, we would have been scrambling. So it's better to keep it simple. It's hard enough as it is. If you watch the documentaries from Apollo 11 and saw the team in the control room, who I grew up under at Johnson Space Center, you saw their anticipation of every burn, every docking, every possible critical operation. You saw their anxiety leading up to that point and the relief when it was done. So the fewer that you have like that, the better you are, I think, and less risk.
Thank you, Madam Chair.